Today is going to sound like a story you've probably heard in other Gospels, because Luke only gives us one extra little bit at the very end, different from this synoptic story from the others. So if you would turn to Luke 5, verse 33 through 39. Verse 39 will be our one that's a little bit different from our other gospel messages from this story. For me, it is page 1734. I don't know if that's helpful or not for you guys. Verse 33. They said to him, Jesus, John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking. Jesus answered, can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, and in those days they will fast. He told them this parable. No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise they will have torn the new one, and the patch from the new will not match the old. No one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise the new wine must be poured into their new wineskins. I'm sorry, I've skipped a line there. Otherwise, the new wine will burst from the skins, and the wine will run out of the wineskins and be ruined. No new wine must be poured into new wineskins. Now, the one thing Luke gives us nobody else does, verse 39. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants the new, for they say, the old is better. Well, we've got our Pharisees and the teachers of the law here with Jesus again. If you remember, several weeks ago when we started this run through Luke, we were hearing about these guys argue at the dinner table with Levi. Remember, everyone's always eating in Luke. There's always dinner happening. And about how he eats with the wrong people, and he gives them the line about, I didn't come to heal those that are healthy, but it's the sick that need a doctor. And we've got the Pharisees in that moment. Remember, they're the healthy ones. They don't realize they are the ones that need the doctor. They're fine. They're the good ones. They're the good people, the good ones to have around. It just doesn't fit with their old ways. Do you remember this from way back when? Okay. In fact, for them, if you remember, this discussion with Jesus seems to be a bit of a threat to their ways, because there's a bit of an attack in the way that they do things versus how Jesus is going to do things. And so in their mind, in this moment of conversation, Jesus is essentially a heretic in this moment. He's speaking against the things they understand. This is a guy that's going to carry on questioning the way that they do the things. So they continue this line of questioning with Jesus and his disciples in this moment, where he's been eating with sinners and the tax collectors, but they're going to switch their angle of attack now. So they've had this one discussion at this table, and now back at this same table, continuing the story here in Luke, they're going to switch their tactic just a little tiny bit. They're going to interrogate Jesus and his disciples on why it is they don't even fast. Why don't you and your disciples ever fast? So we're still here in Levi's house. He's still throwing the banquet when the Pharisees are still disproving of everything they see. Picture the scene with me. Set the tone here. Peter, he's probably on his second leg of lamb. Or if it was me, he's probably eating his second foot at this point of dinner because he's always got his foot in his mouth. James and John are probably carving up something of whatever's left. The wine is flowing freely. There's laughter. People are enjoying themselves. You get the picture. They're having a good time. And in the middle, in the thick of it, Jesus and his disciples, you can sort of sympathize with the Pharisees, just a smidge here, and the viewpoint they're coming from. These guys were fasting a lot. If we look at how this practice of fasting evolved during this time frame, these guys were fasting all the time, refraining from food, doing their religious duties, performing the rites and the rituals and the sacrifices and the ceremonies. They're holy men by every account. They're full of self-control and discipline. Similarly, we hear here that John's disciples do this as well. They're often fasting. They're following John as this sort of pinnacle of what an Old Testament prophet would be, and he lived this very holy and austere life. And so they fast quite a bit as well. The problem with that is, as John said, that he's just a messenger. And that there'll be one that comes after me that you'll follow in a different way. Somewhere along the line, the wires get crossed. And so the Pharisees here have got things wrong at the first instant in this discussion. They're caught up in their way of doing things. They've missed what John prophesied. They've missed what Jesus has been talking about. And they've missed the point of the fasting to begin with, why they did it at all. The Pharisees have their old heritage, the rich culture that they were brought up with. And in the Old Testament, this is the fun thing about it, we get this account of how God deals and builds up and built his people. And part of that building up, part of dealing with Israel is by giving them lots of rules and guidelines and laws in order to live in a way that they might be aware of and recognize their own shortcomings and turn to God. This is the idea of setting up the Levitical law and doing these things. There was no way anyone could live up to God's standard. And so this system was set up to constantly remind them of that, and so that they could turn towards God in some way. But over the centuries, this was built up and built on top of from these original decrees, and more was added over time, and rules that were not there in the first place have been set in place, and there's been set an impossible task. So let's add more rules on top of the impossible task and make it even more difficult, to the point where these rules no longer look like the original and what the intent of them was. And so it lost the intention, it's lost the meaning, and it becomes less and less about realizing your shortcomings and a need to turn to God, and more about keeping a standard. Putting on an outward display of following the rules versus understanding the intent behind actually doing them. So you begin to rely on yourself and rely on your ability to follow these things. And this was done particularly with fasting, the topic that they decide to take up with Jesus in this moment. They've built up fasting now to a point where there's fasting about 2 times a week for people who hold strongly to what has been built up. There were 2 specific days of each week where they would fast. You wouldn't eat any food. And we hear in other gospel stories and from historical accounts, this would be a big song and dance. They would make a big show of fasting. They would put on makeup to make themselves look a little more, like Skeletor from He-Man. They would put on a display. They would make sure everyone knows how their fasting is going. It was an outward display, twice a week. And they had all these other days of fasting throughout the year for specific events and occasions, and for this and that reason. But that's the way they had always done it. But if you actually look in the Old Testament, if you look in the commands, fasting is only ever given as an order one time. Did you know that? One time are they instructed to fast on the calendar year. Only once. And for a pretty good reason, to make an important point. And they've now missed it. That under this old sacrificial system, the people of God, the Israelites, right, they were consistently sacrificing things all the time to show repentance. This is this idea, I've fallen short, I'm going to use this as a penance, but it's to remind myself I need to turn, this is the whole idea. And so they would have a wrong, right? They would wrong a neighbor, whatever it would be. They would take something costly, and they would sacrifice it, an animal, a certain weight of a grain, whatever it would be, as a payment for that sacrifice. A lot of times, if it was like between 2 neighbors that have wronged each other, so you can understand how this would work. Let's say it was a lamb sacrifice for this one. They would sacrifice it. Bits of it would be burned up on the altar. Bits of the animal would be set aside for the priests. This is how the priests ate food. They would take bits of the animal to keep for themselves. The rest of it would be cooked. And the 2 people who wronged each other would sit and they would share a meal with each other as sort of I've wronged you, I've paid my penance here, and I'm now paying by sharing a meal with you. This is kind of how the system worked. So they would do that. On one of these very particular days where they would fall short and this payment would go through, it was the Day of Atonement, where all of the people would do this. But by this point, what the Israelites had discovered was, if I just lined up, right, if I just was like, I've got a dove, I've got an elof of barley, I've got a goat, and I've got this, and I can, if I do this, if I space these out just right, I can do some things. And I can get, you see what I mean? They're very legalistic. Look, I can steal my neighbor's whatever, because I've got the goat ready. You see what I mean? They've lost the point of it, of to turn and change their ways. And so what God wanted, right, though, was to show them the heart and the attitude of deep sorrow, of what this means. We're going to share meals. This is how they pay these penance. And so this is the system that's set up. There's one big sacrifice on the Day of Atonement, which we've talked about before. The high priest gets to enter into the Holy of Holies. It's one sacrifice for the whole of the people, spoken sins and unspoken sins. That was the single day of the year they were instructed to fast, one time. Now it's interesting because in Luke, Jesus doesn't actually use the word fast. In Greek, there'd be a different way it could be said. The word that is actually used is, and tell me if this sounds like something you've heard in another gospel. He uses the word deny yourself. Luke picks up on that language a little bit later about denying yourself to follow him. They should deny themselves. Some variations would say afflict. But deny, I think, is what Luke was probably aiming towards. Deny themselves in some way. This is from Leviticus 16. So fastings are religious rituals for people to show how good they are by the time the system gets to Jesus' day. Look how often I can do this. Look how much I pain myself for whatever. It's no longer about the hearts. And this has been developing over time. If I could, if I could line up my grain offering properly, if I could do these things, then it'll sure look like I'm, these things. It's not about their hearts anymore, right? And keeping with these old ways, even though they're faced with something new. Something new is on the way. Jesus tells them, you brood of vipers, you don't even know, right? And he's been talking to them through this whole meal, who he's sitting with, and they have this question again. They're faced with this new and continue to be a little weary of it. And that's why Jesus responds to them in the way that he does. So that's the scene. This is where we're at. You with me? This is the scene, the background information to get us in this moment with these Pharisees. You kind of have to understand this setup to get us to where they're at here, to understand the parable Jesus gives them. And Jesus responds to them with this story, right? He says, basically, I'm here to celebrate, right? He says, if the bridegroom is around, why do you even worry about fasting? Can you make friends with the bridegroom and fast when you're with him? This is a big claim by Jesus. Because again, throughout the Old Testament and the prophecies leading up to this point, a picture has been given over and over by our prophets of God as the bridegroom and the people as the bride through all these scriptures. And so this imagery of God as the bridegroom and the people his bride brought up here, it's over and over and over again. And so this probably piques our Pharisees' interests when he drops this language into his response. Can you really not celebrate with the bridegroom when they're present? So in their day and age, in their culture, I've done a few weddings in my day. Anybody here ever been to one? Okay, we're going to play a game. If I'm standing at the altar like this, who am I? I'm the groom, aren't I? And where does everybody go with the bride? You hear the doors open. Where's the bride? They're coming up, right? That's how we flip this imagery in your brain, okay? What you have in this olden time was the bride would wait at the front for the groom. The bride would be the one waiting for the ceremony, and the bridegroom, would be the one that arrives and brings the party in with them. And when they come, they're not alone. There would be a whole group that he would have with him, the bridegroom and the bridal chamber, all the men and the people that were celebrating. And the best part, if you were a man getting married when you were celebrating, you were exempt from all of your religious duties during that celebration. You didn't have to do them at all. They wouldn't have to do anything. So if you think bachelor parties are wild now, no. Be with me though. They're exempt. If there is a feast they were supposed to be a part of, if there's a religious duty at the temple they were exempt from those things. They were there to celebrate with the bridegroom. They could party, they could dance. It's the joy of the wedding. So that they can be in that moment. It's the joy when the groom arrives with the whole party, because now everyone is going to celebrate with them. This is the picture that he gives. Can you really, if you're with the bridegroom, wouldn't it be more offensive if you weren't having a good time? But doesn't that say what you really think about this person? If you were like, today's a day of fasting. I'm sorry, I have to sit here. You with me? You don't have to fast. You don't have to wash. You don't do the sacrificial things. You're already with the bridegroom. This is where it's at. And he's saying, God's already here, right? With the people, at one with them already. So why would you need to do any of those things that's supposed to point you to the bridegroom if you're actively with him? It would actually be a big insult to the bridegroom if you wouldn't join in that celebration. If you would just stand like, an 8th grader at a middle school dance in the corner, like if that was your interaction. Because that would show you really don't love the bridegroom at all. So Jesus continues and he says, no one tears out a piece of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise you'd have a torn new garment and an old patch that doesn't match that will just rip the seams even bigger. You don't buy a brand new suit and then cut it apart to patch up your favorite one from the 19 whatevers. It's threadbare. Right? It's no longer a suit fit for the purpose anymore. You can't just patch it up with something brand new because now both of them are really ruined. You've got a good suit with holes in it, and you've got an old suit that's still threadbare with a really obviously bad patch on it. When I worked at Epworth Forest, AJ, you remember my jeans? I had my favorite pair of jeans, and I ripped the biggest hole in the front of the jeans imaginable, and AJ sewed a piece of fabric that had ducks on it, and they were my ducky jeans. I would never wear them ever anymore. I would literally, looking back, I was like, what was I doing? You know what I mean? Like, that is really awful. You get what I mean? I ruined a nice pair of ducky pajamas, I think, to sew that on there. You don't do it. It's not fit for either thing anymore. It's going to look ridiculous. The picture that Jesus is giving is the old has served a purpose. It was good. It did its job. It's aged. It's done its thing. Everything that God was doing in the Old Testament was to prepare to set the stage for a new thing. It's to prepare you for me. Jesus, not me. For Jesus, right? And now it's here. This is what I've been laying out for you at this table with Levi. And I'm offering this to put off the old thing and do something completely new. You, of all people, should know, Pharisees, shouldn't you? You've learned the most. You've studied the Scriptures. You should understand what's been prophesied. Here I am trying to give you these new things, and you want to carve it up. Now it's easy, before I continue to this next thing, for us to always point at Pharisees. I say this all the time. We want to point at Pharisees and laugh. Because Sunday school, they're the bad ones, they're the whoever, right? But perhaps taking patches from Scripture and applying them to ourselves is a little bit like that. We patchwork and cut out the things we enjoy and try to patch it onto the systems that we like. I like when Jesus says this. I can make that fit into what I like over here. I'm not the biggest fan of this, so I just won't cut that. You see what I'm saying? How we can patchwork this thing out? We sit and laugh about the Pharisees not understanding to just take the brand new suit as it is, but even we are like, I like the whole suit. I don't like the bit where it says this, and I'm going to kind of maybe ignore that for a second. You following me? I'd rather do it the way I've always done it and just kind of intermix a few things. So he opens it up even more. And he says, let me tell you another story. New wine for new wineskins. No one pours new wine into an old wineskin. Otherwise, the new wine will burst from the skin, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. New wine is poured into new wineskins. We have glass bottles now. So we wouldn't be pouring wine into skins. They were goat skins. But the thing about it is that these goat skins, when they get old, they tend to dry out and they go brittle over time. And so the thing about new wine is it's still fermenting a little bit. It's still expanding. It's still growing. It's alive, really. So if you take a fermenting, expanding, alive thing and you put it into an old, brittle, dry wineskin, as it ferments and it expands, it eventually is going to break the seams of the goat skin, and it's going to burst it forward, and all the new wine's poured all over the floor. There's a thing called exploding wine bottles. People who make their own wine at home, if they put it in a glass bottle and cork it before it's ready, they will explode from the pressure. So this is what would happen to an old wineskin. You put something alive and fermenting and growing into it. It would burst the skins open, and it would waste the wine you made on the floor. And so what you do is you take new wine and you put it in a brand new wineskin because it's fresh. It still has elasticity. It could grow, it can stretch as the wine ferments and expands. The point Jesus is making here is that what he's bringing isn't going to just fit into a rigid framework they're used to. It's too big, it's too alive, it's too potent. It's going to expand beyond the boundaries that this was set up. What you thought was possible, what could be contained in the rules and the things, it's going to go way beyond that. The old framework in the Old Testament and the law the Pharisees cared about so much, Jesus is fulfilling all those requirements. He's going to completely fill up all of the old and then overflow it and burst it out of that wineskin into something totally new. And so if you have the good news of Jesus working inside of you, if you have the gospel, if you're going to take these things in and have it work and influence and do the things in the society, it's going to grow, it's going to expand, it's going to stretch in ways that you could never have thought possible. So our own rigid framework and understanding has to be willing to expand and be pushed as well. You're going to need a new wineskin in order to accommodate it. If you carry on with the brittle and old, dried out ways of doing things, there's a limitation put on it. But there's no limit to what's going to happen with this new idea. It's going to keep fermenting and growing, and it's going to refine, and it's going to age, and it's going to. You with me? I think one of the things, and then I'll get to Luke's special thing. I'm going to get to it now. I wanted you to hear it again one more time, if you would. Turn to Luke's little special end in verse 39. He says, "And no one drinking the old wine wants the new, for they say the old is better." I sat on Monday morning is when I start working through sermons, and I read it about 15 times, and then just that one verse. And then I pulled up some of my commentaries, and I was reading, and no one focused on this little thing. And so I texted friends of mine that I went through seminary with, and I said, I ran into one of them at the zoo the other day, weirdly enough. And I said, "Hey, what do you make of verse 39? And they were like, "I don't know, I've never thought about it." And I was like, "Oh, great, that's very helpful, everyone." And so I thought about it all week, and I kind of why does Luke want it to reiterate this idea twice? People will drink the old and say it's better. It's his wry little comment. And what I came to is it's a smidge of a warning, I think, to the reader of Luke that's going to tie into his whole gospel understanding that he's got. And it's really, this is what I think Jesus goes with here for Luke's gospel, is this question, is essentially, which wine are you going to drink? Which one? Because you'll drink the old and say it's better. Which one do you want to indulge in? And to put it as wryly as a friend of mine finally ended up texting me, we went back and forth for a while. His name's Aaron, fantastic pastor. He said, which one are you going to get drunk on? What Jesus is getting at here, he's saying after drinking the old, you won't want the new. The old is better. It's picking up on this stubborn refusal to accept something new because we're comfortable with what's there. I like the old, right? If you ever come across this, and I'm this person too, it's hard to get me to do something I've not done before, especially with food, right? I buy the same pasta sauce that I've bought for I don't even know how long. There probably is something better out there. You know what I mean? But I like this pasta sauce. It's good. It's fine. I'm sure if I did, you know what I mean? It's the same thing with if you're a coffee drinker. Think of the thing in your life where you're I've been drinking Folgers since I was 5 years old, working the coal mines. I don't know what it is. But think of that in your brain. He's picking up on this human thing that we get really comfortable with the things we know. We really like it. And the word there for better, it's a weird translation. It probably is closer to it's fine. It's fine. Someone will drink the old wine and they'll say, it's fine. That's a good word if you put it in front of dining or wine, right? But it's fine. It does its job. It's kind of the way you could translate it. Like it serves its purpose. You stubbornly don't want to give something new a chance. And you don't want to do it because you've drunk so deeply of the old. You're saturated in it. You're content with the crusty, hardened wineskin full of old wine. It just hits the spot. It's just exactly, it speaks to me, I understand it, and I'm comfortable with it. I'm never going to be surprised or shocked or challenged. You're too drunk on that old wine to see the point. This is what he's getting at. The question is, which wine were you going to drink moving forward? Are you totally going to get intoxicated on the old wine? The word drunkard, right, comes from the lineage of foolishness. And so I kind of said this. You can drink deeply of the old wine and be an absolute fool before Jesus. Or you can drink of the new wine and be an absolute fool to the world. And that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. We've been saying about how Luke is this challenge of this new kingdom, is this, remember this one another community, this alternative thing where what we do shouldn't make sense to the people that see it in some way. Like, why would you purposefully do something that doesn't benefit you to benefit other people? That doesn't make sense. You with me? That's foolishness. In whose eyes are you going to be the fool? The take off the old and throw on the new. Address the crusty old wineskin of a heart and ask it to be made pliable and workable and stretchy so that it can be filled with a new challenge from the gospel, to be pushed and challenged and do in different ways. To fill it totally with Jesus' gospel and have it change your life around you as you're willing to be molded and grown with it. To span beyond the borders and things you thought were possible. I often say this, we can often land pretty easily with the Pharisees or whoever probably should have listened to Jesus to understand this a little better. But I often think the gospel readily applies even now, and I hope you believe it too. It's not just a challenge to the Pharisees, is it? Because we can be comfortable with what we have now. Like imagine, I went through these scenarios in my brain as I was working through this. Imagine as Jesus' gospel takes off and the church begins to grow, what happens? I often say, once you use a metaphor, after a minute it breaks down. So understand this metaphor is going to break down. But follow, you with me? It'll work, but don't think too hard because it'll fracture at the end. Okay? If the church Jesus establishes and it keeps moving and growing, and that's the new wine. Hey, what happens to new wine as it sits for a while? What's it become? Old wine over time. Imagine if the church in America was established and set itself in old wine, that it was new wine at a moment, and it said for a minute, we figured it out. We're no longer going to be stretched or pulled or challenged or changed. Even though the kingdom is fermenting and growing and pushing and doing these things. I don't know how many of you know this, but the American Christian church broadly supported slavery in America using gospel imperatives. What happens if we're not challenged to grow and ferment as the wine continues to grow and ferment? We become old. What happens is the Christian church finds itself set in the ways that we've understood this, we know how this goes, we no longer want to be pushed and challenged because we've drunk the old and it's fine. We wouldn't have women as pastors. This is a continuous challenge to put off the old because our understandings of the kingdom are limited. And what we understand is never the full picture because it's going to keep changing and growing and pushing and expanding in ways we never thought was possible. Are we willing to stop drinking the old and be challenged to be pushed and grown as the kingdom continues to push and grow in us? Not just the Pharisees, not just the Old Testament versus Jesus' gospel, but the gospel of Jesus as we understand it versus what its fullness really means. I think that's the challenge Luke provides for us, because it'll be easy for us to say, we've drank this, we understand it, and we're comfortable. Are we willing to be uncomfortable, to change and grow as the kingdom expands? Let's pray.